Yeah, so my high school days were not all that much fun. I was fat. If I remember correctly, at my height, I was about 385 pounds, so just under 400 pounds. Today, right now I'm about 195 pounds. So I can give you an idea how much difference there was. So yeah, I was a fatso, wasn't very good at gym, sort of excluded. In those days, of course, it was acceptable that teachers make fun of you. So yeah, it wasn't a very happy time. Also, I was in what they call the technical course. The Ontario government has split the high schools into two. There was the academic people who had a potential for going on to university, and then on the other side there was the people who would be working in the McDonald's or the 1960s and 70s equivalent. Although I think there were a couple of McDonald's. My favorite hamburger at that time was from the Red Barn, if anybody remembers that. So at any rate, that wasn't all that great. However, that was a time that I first got into cycling, and I remember I used to cycle to and from school, which also was not cool. And I was into photography, and for some reason that was sort of like joining the chess club or something. It seemed very strange. So yeah, I didn't really enjoy that. The part that I did enjoy was on my way home. I would drop by McKee Cameras. And McKee Cameras was in the Northtown Plaza. That was at Finch and Yonge in Toronto. That was out in the suburbs. I guess my father liked to keep moving. I'm not sure why. So I was living out in the suburbs, out in the middle of nowhere. There was an old GM bus that would take you down to the subway at Eglinton Avenue, because that's where the subway ended at that time. That was sort of my escape. And unfortunately, I seem to recall it was like 45 minutes to an hour to get down to Eglinton Avenue, and that was from Finch. So it was pretty bad. After that, I went to work for Speedy Typesetting, and Speedy Typesetting was on Richmond. Now, the course that I'd taken at Earl Haig, my high school, was, we called it graphic arts. It could be called typography today. It was about how to run a printing business, and so it was everything from setting type and shooting stuff on camera, stripping the negatives on a light table, shooting plates. So this was all the old photographic 1850s sort of period, where everything was silver based, and you required a dark room and photographic chemicals, and some of those chemicals were not terribly good for you, and it carries on. So, but at any rate, after I graduated from high school, my first real job was with Agfa Gayvart. Now, Agfa Gayvart still around, but they were a very large European. They were sort of the Kodak of Europe, I guess you would say. And so I started working for them in the quality control division, and I really didn't enjoy that all that much. So I used to drop by McKee Cameras ever so often, and at one point I was complaining about working for Agfa Gayvart, and Bill McKee or Ann McKee, I can't remember which one it was, said, well, you should come and work for us. And I thought, yeah, that's the perfect chance. So that was my real opportunity to work in photography. Now, McKee Cameras started out as a photo studio. And the little area in the front, which initially was sort of the waiting area and show off pictures and sell frames, etc., they started to put a few cameras in and some film. And then people would ask about photo finishing, so they brought in photo finishing. And so it sort of built up from there to the point where the studio kept on going further back and further back. Now, they made the studio smaller, but they never made the darkroom smaller. So the darkroom is actually amazingly large for the size of the studio. As a matter of fact, I would say it was larger than the studio. But it got to the point where Bill was taking wedding photographs, but the only thing other than headshots, in the studio, the only thing we'd shoot would be, passport photos, and passport photos were shot on 4x5 film, and we'd just put a piece of paper, the photo paper, just in that area where their head was, and the rest was just waste. It was really quite amazing when you think about how we used to do photography. Photography really is based on doing everything the same. So consistency always was the big number one thing about photography. Not so much anymore because it's no longer silver based, but in the old days you couldn't see the image that you took until you developed the film. And so if there wasn't the right exposure, or a person blinked when you took the picture, or whatever it was, if it wasn't perfect, you wouldn't know until after you developed the film. These days, of course, you can take a picture and look at it and say, oh, I'll take another one because the person blinked or whatever it was. But you couldn't do that then. So it was very important that a photographer be absolutely consistent. So you always knew that you get an image from this particular photographer. And I wasn't terribly artistic. However, I was consistent. And so my consistency, along with when I was processing the films, which is another consistent thing, time, temperature, the time of the processing, critically important as to how it turns out, and the temperature of the chemistry. And of course, obviously, the warmer the chemistry, the faster it would work. And so the standard there was 20 Celsius, which turns out to be 68 Fahrenheit. And those things, of course, still stick in my mind. How do I know that? Well, it's stuck in my mind. So at any rate, at McKee Cameras, that gave me an opportunity to work. Most of my time was, helping with photo finishing and selling cameras, obviously, when I first started. But they would allow me later on to take passport pictures. And from there, Bill McKee, this is really amazing. Bill McKee had an old Metz flash system. And the Metz had a pack that you would carry around your neck, or on your back. And it was a wet cell. It was in a plastic case, but it was a wet cell battery. And I knew that because it would show from little floating bubbles on the side how much power there was left. So that was a little hydrometer on the side checking to see if there was any power left. So you can imagine lead acid battery, how heavy that pack would be. And with an external flash, with a separate flash. And he would shoot these weddings on a 4x5 speed graphic, which was one of these cameras with bellows. It was a handheld bellows camera. How he ever managed to do that, I have no idea. But I remember that, Bill was in terrific shape. He would play golf every couple of days. He would be, even when he was in working, he was always exercising and stretching. And I remember, I think he was about 50 or something. He came to me one Saturday, plopped the Metz flash and the battery pack down on the counter and said, "Alan, photography is a young man's game." And I sort of smiled at him because he seemed to be absolutely fine. But I learned actually something from Bill McKee. It's not just time, temperature, and consistency with the old type of photography. It actually is being able to tell that magic moment ahead of time, which it's not easy to do. It's a real skill to be able to tell when that you should be taking the picture. And with those old cameras, there would be a slight delay. So when you push down the shutter, the shutter release, the shutter did not release right away. So literally, if the action was peaking, you had to fire the shutter before the action peaked. And some people had it. Bill did. I didn't. Could never do that. When I was in high school, they'd ask me to go and shoot pictures of the basketball team, and I'd have all these pictures of these people jumping up in the air. Where the basketball was, I have no idea. These days, of course, you'd Photoshop in the basketball, but not then. So I had all these unusable pictures, but it became obvious. Also, same with football, American-style football. They'd have me go out and shoot the shots of the players, but I couldn't. I'd miss the highlights. If a person was reaching to catch the ball, he would have already fallen on the ground with the ball by the time the shutter released. So I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do that. So at any rate, at least we had a good time there, and I learned the basics of photography from McKee cameras. I also met a very interesting young man called George Jasenko, who was the brother-in-law of Bill McKee, and he knew all about photography. So he was really the person who was responsible for bringing cameras in. So they would have, one time they were lights dealer, so you could have Leicas. They were Nikon dealer, obviously Yashica, Minolta, Konica. I mentioned Yashica. What else did they have? They had a camera that I ended up buying, a Kawa 6, which is sort of I guess you would say, the poor man's Hasselblad. What else happened during those times? Anyway, it was a very, very interesting time. I had a great experience.